Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Things have been pretty wild over in Ukraine the past few weeks, so we're going to zero in on one of the biggest developments. Have you been following this whole thing with the long-range missiles the U.S. just approved sending them over to Ukraine?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's a huge move. Could really shake things up over there.
Yeah, we're talking about a potential game changer here, so let's break it down. We're talking about the Biden administration giving Ukraine the okay to use U.S.-supplied Army tactical missile systems, those ATAT TMS,
That CMS, yeah.
to hit targets inside Russia. And we're getting all this from some pretty reliable sources, too. Like, we dug into reports from the Associated Press, CNBC, and Tagesschau. They're all saying the same thing. This is a major shift in U.S. policy.
Yeah, and up until now, the U.S. has been super hesitant to give Ukraine weapons that could actually strike deep into Russia. They've been walking this tightrope, trying to support Ukraine without, directly provoking Putin.
Right. So why the sudden change of heart? Why now?
Well, from what I'm seeing in these reports, it all boils down to one thing. North Korea.
North Korea.
Yeah, North Korea is entering the fray. And I'm not talking about a symbolic gesture or two. We're talking boots on the ground.
Oh, wow. So this is more than just a few advisors or something.
Way more. The reports are estimating over 10,000 North Korean troops are already in Ukraine, primarily in that strategically vital Kursk region.
Kursk, right. Yeah, that area that Ukraine had managed to capture. But now it's facing a Russian counteroffensive. And now they've got North Korean troops mixed in, too.
Exactly. And that's what's spooking everyone. It's a total game changer because it signals this potential power shift on a global scale. If a country as isolated as North Korea is openly backing Russia, it could give others second thoughts, embolden them to maybe jump in on Putin's side, too. And then who knows how much further this thing could spread.
And the AP article I was reading mentioned that U.S. and South Korean intelligence believe North Korea is also sending Russia a whole bunch of munitions. So they're really going all in with Putin, huh?
Seems like it. Which begs the question, what's North Korea getting out of this whole deal?
Good question.
Some experts think they're hoping Russia will give them some advanced weapons tech in return. Can you imagine the ripple effects of this war reaching all the way back to the Korean peninsula?
Yeah, it's crazy. It really highlights how interconnected everything is. And, speaking of connections, we can't forget about the elephant in the room, President-elect Trump. This whole missile decision comes just 2 months before he takes office.
Yeah.
And his stance on Ukraine, well, let's just say it's been a little all over the place.
Yeah, he's definitely been critical of how much aid the U.S. is sending to Ukraine. But it's hard to say what he'll actually do when he's in office. Will he pull back support entirely? Especially now that North Korea is involved. It's a huge wild card, and it just adds another layer of uncertainty to this already volatile situation.
Absolutely. So much uncertainty. And how is Ukraine itself reacting to all of this? With these missiles being approved and everything, it seems like they've been pretty quiet about it, at least initially.
Yeah, Zelensky didn't even come right out and confirm they were getting the ATAC CMS. He just said, and I quote, "The missiles will speak for themselves."
The missiles will speak for themselves. Huh. There's a certain confidence to that. I like it.
Yeah, actions speak louder than words, right?
Definitely. But while Ukraine's playing it cool, some of their allies are being a lot more vocal. Like Poland's foreign minister. He straight up applauded Biden's decision.
Yeah, and he even went so far as to say that Biden is speaking to Putin in a language that Putin understands.
Ooh. Okay, so that's some pretty strong language right there.
Definitely. It shows you just how on edge a lot of these Eastern European countries are. They've been living under Russia's shadow for decades, and this whole situation in Ukraine has brought back some pretty bad memories. They're watching everything very closely, wondering what it all means for their own security.
And how is Russia taking the news about these missiles? Are they sweating it, or?
Let's just say they're not happy. The Tagesschau.de article actually quoted some Russian officials calling this an unprecedented step and a provocation. They're even saying it could spark World War III.
World War III. Whoa. Hold on a minute. It's just a few missiles, right? Are they really that worried, or is this just like a bunch of bluster?
It's highly unlikely Russia would actually risk a nuclear war over this. But their over-the-top reaction tells us one thing. They see this move by the U.S. as a major escalation. It's a direct challenge to their military operations in Ukraine, and a sign that the West is ready and willing to provide Ukraine with even more powerful weapons.
So we've got Ukraine getting ready to use these long-range missiles. Their allies are voicing their support. And Russia's making some pretty dramatic threats. But the big question everyone's asking is, will these ATAS CMS actually make a difference on the battlefield? Well, that's what we all want to know, right?
That's the million-dollar question. And it's a tough one. Honestly, it's like trying to predict the weather. There are so many factors at play.
Okay, so let's try to break down those factors then.
Yeah.
What are these ATAS CMS really capable of? I mean, what kind of impact could they actually have on the war? We need to get into the nitty-gritty here.
Absolutely. So first off, we need to understand that ATAS CMS are surface-to-surface missiles. They're designed to hit targets on the ground, not like an air-to-ground missile launched from a plane or anything.
Okay, ground warfare. Got it. But what makes them so special? Why are they such a big deal?
Their range, these things can travel about 190 miles, which is way farther than anything Ukraine has had access to before. To put that in perspective, imagine being able to hit a target as far away as,
I don't know.
pick a city.
Let's say Boston.
Boston. Okay.
Imagine being able to hit a target as far away as Boston is from, say, Washington, D.C. That's the kind of range we're talking about.
Wow. Okay, now that puts it in perspective. That's a huge distance. I can see why everyone's so worked up about these missiles. But what could Ukraine realistically target with that kind of range? That's where things get interesting. Strategically speaking, they could potentially hit some really high-value targets deep inside Russia. Things like command centers, ammo dumps, maybe even air bases that were completely out of reach before.
So they could actually disrupt Russia's entire military operation.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe even force them to change their tactics.
Potentially, yes. But there's always a flip side to these things. Some analysts are worried that striking targets inside Russia could provoke Putin even further. You know, he might lash out even harder, maybe even start targeting civilian infrastructure in Ukraine.
So it's a high-risk, high-reward kind of situation. Give Ukraine a powerful weapon that could turn the tide, but also risk escalating the conflict even more. It's a tough call.
Yeah.
And it's got to be weighing heavily on everyone involved.
Absolutely. And we haven't even touched on the potential global impact this could have on alliances, the economy, other countries getting involved. There's a lot to unpack here.
A lot to unpack. And that's exactly what we're going to do in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore those international reactions, the potential economic fallout, and what this all means for the future of this conflict. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Okay, so we're back, and we were just talking about how this whole long-range missile thing is a pretty big deal. But it's not just about Ukraine and Russia, right? It's got the whole world watching and reacting. What I'm really curious about is how other countries are responding to all of this. Like, is anyone taking sides?
Oh, yeah, definitely. This situation is sending shockwaves through the global community. Everyone's trying to figure out where they stand and what it all means for them.
Yeah, and some countries aren't exactly mincing words about it. Like we talked about Poland's foreign minister basically saying, Biden's doing what needs to be done to get through to Putin.
Right, and that really highlights the anxieties running high in Eastern Europe. I mean, they've been living under Russia's shadow for so long. This whole situation in Ukraine brings back some pretty dark memories for them.
So they're firmly in Ukraine's corner.
Got it. What about countries like Germany, though? They haven't been as gung-ho about sending heavy weaponry over to Ukraine, have they?
Germany's in a tough position. You know, they've got these deep economic ties to Russia, and they're really worried about escalating the conflict. They've been pushing for a negotiated settlement. But this move by the U.S. might force them to rethink their whole approach.
Yeah, it's almost like the U.S. is laying down the law, saying this is where we stand. What do you think? You in or out?
Yeah.
It puts pressure on other NATO allies, too, like the UK and France. They've been supporting Ukraine, but not to this extent.
Exactly. It's a bit of a tipping point, I think. The CNBC article even suggested that some U.S. officials believe that was the plan all along.
Yeah.
You know, get everyone on the same page and send a clear message to Moscow that they're not messing around.
Okay, so a show of force.
Yeah.
Got it. But doesn't that risk making Russia feel cornered? Like they have no choice but to escalate things?
It's a delicate balance, right?
Yeah.
You want to project strength and deter aggression, but you also don't want to back Putin into a corner where he feels like he has nothing left to lose. And of course, we can't forget about the wild card in all of this, President-elect Trump. We talked about his skepticism towards Ukraine aid before. And now the AP article is suggesting that some of Ukraine's allies are worried he might pressure them into a peace deal that favors Russia.
It's a legitimate concern. Trump is unpredictable.
Yeah.
And he's never hidden his admiration for Putin. If he decides to get cozy with Russia, it could leave Ukraine in a really vulnerable position, even with these new long-range missiles.
Man, that would be a nightmare scenario for Zelensky. He's trying to navigate this incredibly complex situation, and the rug could be pulled out from under him just like that.
And we haven't even mentioned the UN yet. They're calling for a fair peace, but what does that even mean in this context?
Right. It's easy to say, everyone just calm down and talk it out. But it's a lot harder when you've got one country invading another and then bringing in North Korea as backup.
It's messy. And it shows the limitations of international organizations like the UN. They can try to mediate, but they can't force anyone to do anything.
True. So lots of international intrigue going on. But let's bring it back to the battlefield for a minute. We've talked about the range of these ATACMS, but what can they actually do? What kind of damage are we talking about here?
Oh, these aren't just your run-of-the-mill missiles. We're talking precision-guided munitions. They can take out very specific targets with incredible accuracy.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, so imagine a Russian command center where they're making all their strategic decisions, or a heavily fortified bunker where they've stashed their weapons, or even a bridge, a key supply route for their troops. These are the kinds of targets that ATACMS could effectively neutralize.
So not just blowing things up, but strategically crippling Russia's ability to fight.
Exactly. Disrupt their logistics, their communications, their chain of command. That's where these missiles could have a real game-changing impact.
Okay, I get it. But if they're so powerful, why did the U.S. send them sooner?
Because it's a risky move. There's always been this fear that it would be seen as too provocative, like crossing a red line that Putin wouldn't tolerate.
So a calculated risk. Give Ukraine a fighting chance, but risk further escalation. There are no easy answers here.
And it's important to remember that even with these ATACMS, Ukraine is still facing an uphill battle. Russia has a much larger military, and they haven't been afraid to use brutal tactics. These missiles might be a game changer, but they're not a silver bullet.
So where does that leave us? What does this all mean for the future of the war? Is there any hope for a peaceful resolution, or are we headed for a long and bloody conflict?
Honestly, it's impossible to say for sure. There are just too many variables. The effectiveness of the ATACMS, Russia's response, the political situation in both countries, and then you've got the potential for other actors to get involved. It's a very fluid situation.
It feels like we're living in a time where anything could happen.
Yeah.
And it can change in an instant. It's unsettling.
Absolutely. But what we can do is stay informed, analyze the situation, and try to make sense of what's happening. That's what we're trying to do here.
That's right. So speaking of making sense of things, I want to shift gears a bit and talk about the bigger picture here. You know, the underlying trends that this war is revealing. Okay, so we've talked about the international fallout and the impact this could have on the battlefield. But I got to say, this whole situation feels like it's pointing to something way bigger.
Yeah.
You know, something almost scary.
I know what you mean. It's like we're watching the rules of war being rewritten before our eyes.
Exactly. Like, think about it. North Korea, a country that's basically been a hermit kingdom for decades, is now openly supporting Russia's invasion.
Yeah.
And these long-range missiles, they completely change how we think about the front lines.
It's true. The old rules of engagement, you know, the idea of clearly defined battlefields and two armies clashing head-on, that's becoming a thing of the past.
Yeah, it's like we're entering this new era of warfare, one where cyber attacks, propaganda, even private military companies are all part of the equation. It's kind of terrifying if you really think about it.
It definitely raises some serious questions about global security. If this kind of hybrid warfare becomes the norm, what's stopping other conflicts from spiraling out of control in the same way?
And then you got to wonder about the long-term consequences. I mean, are we going to see a return to those Cold War proxy wars where superpowers duke it out indirectly through other countries?
Or could this actually lead to something totally different? Maybe a new kind of global cooperation? Imagine if instead of escalating conflicts, countries actually work together to de-escalate them, you know, find peaceful solutions before things get out of hand.
It's a hopeful thought, but I got to be honest, it feels kind of far-fetched right now with everything going on in Ukraine.
It's a long shot for sure, but it highlights something really important. Peace isn't just about stopping the fighting. It's about addressing the root causes of conflict. It's about creating a world where every country feels safe, respected, heard.
It's a powerful message. And it makes you realize that this conflict, as awful as it is, could also be an opportunity to learn and grow, a chance to rethink how we approach global security and diplomacy.
It's true. We all have a role to play in this, even those of us who are far away from the actual fighting. The decisions made in the next few weeks and months will have ripple effects across the globe.
And that brings us back to you, our listeners, because ultimately it's up to all of us to stay informed, to have these tough conversations, and to demand better from our leaders. You know, leaders who will actually work towards a more peaceful and just world.
Absolutely. A world consumed by war benefits no one. It's in everyone's best interest to find a way to coexist peacefully, to build bridges instead of walls.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. It's been a heavy but important conversation, and I really hope it's given you a better understanding of this complex situation.
Keep asking questions, keep learning, and most importantly, never stop believing in a better future.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep digging, keep thinking, and keep striving for a world where understanding wins over conflict. If you enjoy our daily news podcast and want to stay updated, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell for notifications. Your support really helps us bring you the latest news every day. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.